My name's Mark Douglas and I am my role presently is practice leader for deaf and hard of hearing for the Ministry of Education. In my previous roles I've been a teacher of the deaf and an advisor on deaf children. So it's a real privilege to be here today and to facilitate this session. The presentation was about transitioning students into school. So what is required in terms of the needs of the child, the strength of the child, and what resources might be available, what the team around the child might look like, and what are the good practices that are involved in a good transition into school. Early planning. So obviously for this family, the process started when the child turned 4, and that's probably a good time to start thinking about transition to school. Each journey will be different for each child and for each family, depending on the strengths and needs of that child and prior to going into school. And you need to look at what are the school options available, what are the placement options within your local area, whether it be the local school, whether it be a satellite class that maybe sits under a deaf education centre, or whether it might be a deaf education centre like a base school or something like that itself. Meeting with the school teams. So once you've made a decision on where you want to go, then scheduling meetings with the school or the area, the facility that you're going to, getting to know who's there, they get to know you, having an understanding of what the needs and strengths are for your child. Then we'll look at what resources may be required, and I'm going to go through it. There's a raft of resources, and they sort of sit a bit on a continuum that are available depending on the child and the family. Okay, so resources can be many different things. It can be people, it can be materials, and it can also be funding. So there's sort of 3 different areas we can look at for resources. And depending on the strengths and needs of the child will depend on the type of resources that are required to allow them to really benefit in the school environment. It can also be for professional learning and development, so we can provide professional learning development for the team within the school to develop their understanding around what the needs and the strengths of the child are as well. So the first 2 resources are funding resources, which you may or may not have heard of. So each school has a special education grant, and your child is allocated funding as they go into the school, and correct me if I'm wrong, depending on the decile ranking of the school will determine the amount of the special education grant that goes in with your child. Then there's the ongoing resourcing scheme, and the ongoing resourcing scheme is targeted funding. What that means is that the child is identified as having needs that may follow them all the way through school. And then there's what we call specialist funding. And most of that funding sits within the Ministry of Education, and that gives the family and the school access to practitioners such as advisors on deaf children like Sue, speech language therapists if they're required, occupational therapists, physical therapists. So there's a raft of specialists that are available if required to assist with that process and supporting that child in school. There's also a new initiative that's just starting to roll out across the country now called New Zealand Sign Language at School. And that initiative is funding, it sits over and above the ongoing resourcing scheme funding, and that's for students who require New Zealand Sign Language to access the curriculum. And then there's the assistive technology that some of you may be aware of already, FM systems or DM systems as they're now called, and any other assistive technology that might be required. So once the child is in school, it's really important that we monitor that transition into school and make sure that what was required and for that child to be engaged in the classroom setting and to be able to access the curriculum and to feel, happy basically in the school environment is happening. And the way we do that can be either through informal or formal monitoring. Obviously, families talking to the teacher is probably the first port of call. Talking with your child to see how they feel, are things going okay. Teacher-parent meetings and team meetings, or what we call individual education plan meetings as well, may be required if there are practitioners involved, like a resource teacher of the deaf or a teacher aide and so on and so forth, so that a plan is developed and reviewed on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, I was a panel member on the Transition to Schools workshop, which is something I'm quite passionate about. We've been through, just in the last few years, that whole transition, and it's terrifying. So I'm really, really passionate about giving parents the most information that they need to make that transition easier, both on themselves and on the kids and on the school involved. I think my summary for transitioning into school is that the parents are, I've heard it said, the team leader, and you have to be. You have to be that constant presence. You can't ever step back and think that somebody else will do it, because nobody knows your child like you do. You are the one that knows that child. You are the one that knows what they need, how they behave, what freaks them out, what do they love doing. You are that person, and nobody is more professional than you when it comes to your child.
Many of the other parents commented that transitioning to school was very difficult. There are issues with funding. Lots of them reported difficulties with accessing services, such as advisor of deaf children's services, teacher of the deaf services, being unsure of where to turn or who to listen to. It can be overwhelming. So I think it's important that parents, such as myself, understand what to do and where to go. So listening to other parents today was interesting, to better understand some of the answers to these questions.
So when you have school visits, make sure that everybody's involved, everybody knows. The school visit's like a sort of taste test for going into school, and that's where your child will make their opinions known on whether they like school, whether they think school's going to be great, or whether this transition's going to be painful and hideous and awful.
The ultimate outcome for me would be families and caregivers and whānau who are confident in their ability to lead that process around transition into school. So they feel confident to be able to ask the questions that need to be asked, confident that the resources will be there if they're required, and confident in their conversations with the schools in terms of having high expectations for their child, that it's going to be a successful process, and also confident to speak up when things aren't going right. And finally, and it's something that's actually come out of today, has been confident that they have access to people like advisors on deaf children and access to accurate and up-to-date information.